ultimately, eventually, Chairman Pai agreed with us, as did other news outlets, including many of the conservative media. There should be nothing partisan about protecting localism and competition in journalism. And I appreciated your comments about that goal being of heightened importance, I think, in the pandemic, particularly so. Can you tell us a little bit more about how specifically you would protect and enhance local journalism? The chair, Senator Cantwell, is leading a bill, the Local Journalism Sustainability Act. I'm a strong supporter of it. One example, just one example of what we could do. Maybe you have some thoughts.
Thank you, Senator. I want to say first that, local broadcasting really is vital to the lifeblood of every community. I mean, they, alone among communications platforms, are dedicated to serving local communities with emergency alerts, with local news, with local journalism. So I think it's critically important. I would like to see, well, first of all, I also support Chairwoman Cantwell's bill and the payroll tax credit. I think that's great. That's obviously not within the jurisdiction of the FCC. But I'd like to see the FCC have more opportunities for diverse viewpoints. There's a broadcast incubator program that was started, I believe, in 2018 or 2019. And its intent is to help more minorities get access to radio. And I think it would be great to expand that. Number one, I guess I'd like to see how it's working, if I'm confirmed. But I don't see any reason why not to expand it to television. I think we need more opportunities for voices that are not normally heard to actually be heard on broadcasting, because that still is the place where people get, again, local news and information.
I'm a very faithful listener to radio since I spend a good deal of my life in the car bouncing around the state of Connecticut. We don't travel by plane, as some of my colleagues do, but all by car. And I would join you in seeking to strengthen those local voices. I think they're very important. Let me ask you, and I'm going to have some questions for the record on robocalls, about the proposed rule that Chairman Rosenworcel circulated last month, and I hope that you will be a supporter of efforts on robocalls. But Senator Blackburn and I, with the support of the chairwoman, Senator Cantwell, have been having a number of hearings in recent weeks about the revelations of harms by big tech, a number of the platforms to children and teens, also on the issue of privacy. We will be hearing from Instagram CEO next week. I would also note that in October, the FTC issued a very disturbing report regarding negative consumer impacts of the repeal of the FCC's broadband privacy rules. I'm sure you're familiar with them. There are deep problems. I don't need to tell anyone on this panel, either on your side or ours, with both big tech and big cable's violations of consumer privacy, and we need rules for both. A number of us have been working on various bills. So I'd like to give you and Mr. Davidson an opportunity to comment on the importance of this privacy crisis and what Congress ought to be doing, what you can do through the FCC and the NTIA.
Yes, thank you, Senator. Privacy is sacred, privacy of personal information. And when your personal information is abused, it can have economic impacts, it can have social impacts, it can even have physical impacts. So I have been a huge supporter of Congress passing a comprehensive consumer privacy bill. And if I'm confirmed, I would love to work with you and anybody else on this dais on doing that. But the implications of not protecting privacy, whether it be on big tech platforms or over ISPs, are enormous, and the harms have already been shown. I think one of the things that were in the FTC's report was it was shown that bounty hunters were getting some of the information, right? And sometimes bounty hunters find people that should be found, but a lot of times they find people that shouldn't be found. So it could actually result in physical harm. So I would love to see Congress move forward. And, if the FCC has the opportunity, which would take some time, I think that would be interesting as well.
Thank you. Mr. Davidson?
I'll just say quickly, first of all, thank you for the question. Not a week goes by that there isn't some new revelation about how Americans are finding out that their private data is being used in ways that are harmful or unexpected, and we need to do better in that area. I know you've been a leader in this space for a long time. The most important thing that we can do is passing a comprehensive privacy bill for the United States. I know this is something that this committee has been actively working on, and if confirmed, I would do everything that I can to bring NTIA's resources to bear to support that effort. So thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Madam Chair.
Senator Blunt.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Ahmad, I'm afraid I'm not going to have any questions for you, and you may not get many today, but I did want to tell you how much I appreciated your mentioning Ralph Regula, who got to serve with him in the House. He was a great leader of that committee that you worked on, and you were a great part of that team, and I'm glad you're willing to serve in this job.
Thank you.
Ms. Schoen, we're talking about local news, local radio. Let's talk about Locast a little bit. You were on that board. Locast built its business model on streaming local television to the internet, generally without obtaining the consent of the broadcast TV station or the copyright holders. There was a lawsuit. You went on that board actually after the lawsuit started. And at this point, I think in August, there was a determination that Locast had agreed to a settlement. So no appeal here, $32 million settlement. Do you want to talk about that, your decision to go on the board, and if this impacts your dealings with the very same local broadcasters that sued the company that you were on the board of? And I only have 5 minutes, so I know you can talk about this a lot, but be as brief as you can in clearing this up for me.
Sure, Senator Blunt. So Locast was a nonprofit service that provided local broadcast signals through streaming to folks who couldn't get them. And it relied on a copyright exemption. Okay, this was a case of first impression. It relied on an exemption for nonprofits. I thought it was a good thing both for local broadcasters, and local broadcasters didn't sue, the network sued. I also thought it was good for viewers. I mean, these were viewers, for example, in orphan counties who maybe couldn't get certain programming. There were a lot of low-income folks that also used the service. So I thought this was, from a public interest, kind of pro-consumer perspective, I thought this was good.
But the judge didn't agree.
Well, no, what the judge said, and let me be specific about this. What the judge said was Locast was not entitled to the exemption. So it's literally within days of that decision coming down, we shut Locast down. And it's in the process of selling its assets, and it will no longer exist by the end of the year.
And you don't think this will have any impact on your dealing with local broadcasters in any way?
I do not believe it will. Like I said, I revere local broadcasting. I think it's very important. I would like, if I'm confirmed, I would really like to sit down with them, explain what I did, and get from them ideas about how I can help local broadcasting be more competitive, more resilient, and more diverse.
And the networks that you say are the ones that sued Locast, you have no problem with them either?
I don't have any problem with them. I mean, I have no hard feelings. And it wouldn't bias me in any way. I take very seriously allegations of bias, and I've been working very closely with the Office of Government Ethics to make sure that, I have no conflicts and I have no, predetermined biases. No, but just because they sued Locast, no, that wouldn't bias my decisions. And as a policymaker, if I'm confirmed, I have to set my biases, even if I had a bias, I have to set those aside, look at the totality of the record, look at the law, confer with my colleagues, confer with staff, confer with all of you, and make a decision.
So I've got a list of comments here about Fox News. Are you biased against them?
So you're referring to my tweets that are now pretty famous. And I understand they're concerning to some, and anyone who knows me knows I'm pretty direct. But they were made in my role as a public interest advocate. They were made in the context, and I think context is very important, context of hearings. hearings and media reports. You know, maybe the tone was a little sharper. Maybe I should have dulled it a little bit. But again, it was part of my job, essentially, as a public interest advocate.
And do you think they're the only news agency that is state-sponsored propaganda? That's your
yeah.
quote, by the way.
Yeah, I know it's my quote, yeah. I just wanted just to complete my thought. My opinions as a public interest advocate will have no bearing on how I behave as a policymaker if I'm confirmed. You know, I've been in government before, and the values that are important to being a policymaker, responsiveness, transparency, integrity, that's what you'll get from me if I'm confirmed. So yes, I said some things maybe too sharp, but they will have absolutely no determination in how I would rule on a proceeding with any of those companies.
Well, I wish I had more time, Chair, but I don't, so.
Thank you, Senator Senator Blumenthal. I'm sorry, Senator Schatz. Sorry, Senator Schatz.
Thank you very much, Chair Cantwell. Mr. Davidson, I know you appreciate the unique connectivity challenges that Hawaii faces because we are the most isolated, populated place on the planet. I need your commitment and the staff's commitment to work with me in my office to meet Hawaii's broadband needs. And you may know that the context is that the negotiations around the bipartisan infrastructure bill were unnecessarily contentious around definitions because people couldn't picture in their mind's eye the difference between terrestrial infrastructure and connecting the 50th state, which happens to be an island chain. And so do I have your commitment to work on these issues, including the equitable treatment of the 50th state?
Thank you, Senator. You absolutely have my commitment on that, and I appreciate from our conversation how important this is to Hawaii and to making sure that we fulfill this promise to connect everyone in America. And the beauty of the program that's been put forward in the IIJA is that every state will have its own plan, and I look forward to working with you to make sure we get the right plan for your state.
Thank you. One more question for you, Mr. Davidson. The Tribal Broadband Connectivity Fund, as the chair of the Indian Affairs Committee, I've heard directly from Native American leaders about the disproportionate impact that COVID-19 has had on their communities, but we did provide historic levels of relief funds that continue to be deployed to tribal governments and the Native Hawaiian community. Will you commit to consulting and coordinating with Native Hawaiians, Native Americans, and Alaska Native communities on the deployment of these NTIA funds?
I absolutely will commit to that.
Thank you very much, Ms. Sohm. Nice to see you. Earlier this year, I, with other members of this committee, led a letter to the CEOs of AT&T, Verizon, and T-Mobile, asking for commitment to protect consumers before the carriers shut down 3G networks. Do you share our concerns about a 3G shutdown? And I know you're excellent at summarizing, so could you please summarize the problem for consumers and what you could do about it as a commissioner?
Sure, Senator Schatz. So basically, the carriers want to stop their 2G and 3G, and in some cases 4G transmissions, their mobile transmissions, because they want to move to 5G, which is important. We want that. It's going to be a transformative technology. We want that to happen. However, there are still, I believe it's 13 to 17% of Americans still rely on 2G or 3G. So shutting it down too soon without some sort of mitigation will leave a lot of people without the ability to call an ambulance, to call their family, or to do anything just about. So this seems to me to be a problem that could be resolved through some negotiation. There is a petition pending before the FCC right now, that was submitted by the alarm industry, because that's another thing. Alarms will stop working. So there are serious public safety implications about shutting down 2G and 3G too quickly.
Yeah, I would just observe that this is so potentially catastrophic and so fixable.
Yes.
That my worry is that everybody assumes it's going to get fixed because it would be preposterous to leave millions of Americans without the basic connectivity that their lives depend on, their lives depend on. And yet, here we are without a solution. So I'm hoping we can work together upon confirmation.
Absolutely. Look, this is where I think my collaborative skills and my negotiation skills, if I'm confirmed, could really come into play, because this seems to me to be an issue that can be resolved with a little bit of play.
Thank you. Final question, Mr. Kulko. The American Community Survey is the primary source of data on the nation's changing socioeconomic and demographic characteristics. Do I have your commitment to work with me to address the challenges facing ACS, including what additional resources may be necessary?
Yeah, Senator, I commit to work with you on improving the resources and working on the challenges for the ACS.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Senator Schatz, and I just want to thank you for your leadership on these important issues. All states aren't the same, and I think that it's too bad, again, that the infrastructure bill didn't accommodate and recognize the uniqueness of Hawaii in these issues, and this isn't the first time that this has gone on. So I think people are just, the jig is up on broadband. Like, we're not going to keep doing the same thing. We're not going to tolerate, like, we're going to get back to you. We're not going to tolerate. We're going to get the accuracy, and we're going to come up with a plan, even for places like Alaska and Hawaii that are hard to serve. Okay, Senator Fisher.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to each of our nominees for being here today. Ms. Sohn, I noticed you tweeted that FCC subsidies can be helpful in, quote, forcing companies to compete. You've also said that, quote, whenever you hear anybody complain about overbuilding of broadband networks, translate that to competition, end quote. Would you stand by those statements, yes or no?
I would stand by those statements, although I do support what's in the IAJA, the notion that the money should go first to building where there is nothing, unserved areas, and then and only then should underserved areas be served. So I was a big supporter of the IAJA. I worked on it with several offices here. And so I did tweet those things prior, but I like the framework that's in the IIJA right now.
Thank you for clarifying that. I appreciate that. After Congress passed the bipartisan infrastructure bill, the Commerce Secretary Raimondo talked about transparency and oversight that were needed for state broadband proposals, and she said we need to make sure that the money isn't used in overbuilding. So I'm glad that you agree with her. Mr. Davison, in our conversation when we met earlier, you also spoke about the redundancy of overbuilding, and I would ask you if you would confirm that to us here at the hearing.
I confirm that I certainly support Secretary Raimondo's comments on this.
Okay, thank you very much. Ms. Sohn, you often tie the competition conversation to municipal broadband. And I previously expressed concerns to former FCC Chairman Tom Wheeler about the Commission's actions on municipal broadband because it undermines state laws. You were his counsel at that time. Did you advise him on that order?
I probably did. I don't really have a specific recollection. But I think it's important to note that right now the FCC can do nothing about municipal broadband. As you know, we did try to preempt the state laws of North Carolina and Tennessee that prohibited either new builds of municipal broadband or extensions of already built networks. And the Sixth Circuit said that we did not have the authority. So if I'm confirmed, there's not a lot I could do about municipal broadband.
Given the court's reversal of that preemption order, do you regret pursuing that?
No, Senator Fisher. I have supported municipal broadband for a very long time. It's actually, I mean, things are kind of changing now. It's not so much cities and towns providing their own service. What you're now seeing is middle mile being built and commercial entities, they're called open access networks. They have them in Utah, they have them in North Carolina, they have them in a lot of places, where basically the municipality, the city, the town builds the middle mile, and then they invite commercial broadband providers to come and provide service, and that really results in enormous competition.
So do you believe that the FCC should be able to dictate to states what their broadband policy should be? Should the FCC preempt state law?
So the FCC does not have the authority to preempt state law. And I actually think, look, the last 3 or 4 years, I've been working a lot with the states to try to get them sort of ready for what Mr. Davidson is about to give them in terms of money. I think the FCC needs to have a better relationship with the states. And if I'm confirmed, one of the things I would ask the chairwoman if I could be a liaison to the states, because I've really formed very good relationships with them. And I actually agree with you. I think in the past, we haven't outreach to the states and made them partners. We've been more adversarial. So
There's a committee within the FCC, am I correct in this, that it's a committee that brings the states together, and it's my understanding from some members of our Public Service Commission in the state of Nebraska that this committee, even though it's there, it doesn't meet, it doesn't do anything. Would you be interested in looking into that and possibly, from your comments, you know, and working with states here to be able to have that communication in a more formalized manner through this committee?
I assume you're talking about the Joint State Board on Universal Service? Absolutely. I mean, I was Chairman Wheeler's liaison to the Intergovernmental Advisory Committee, and I worked with them very well, made a lot of friends, including some friends who just, Republican friends who just signed a letter on my behalf. So I would be delighted to do that. If Chairwoman Rosenworcel were to, if I was confirmed and she wanted to appoint me to the joint board, I'd be honored.
Nebraska was one of the few states after the '96 law that did form their own state universal service fund, and was very proactive on that, and it works well. But so that's why I do have concerns about some of your comments on preempting state laws, to be forthright with you.
Fair enough.
Thank you.
Happy to clarify them.
Thank you.
Senator Klobuchar.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Congratulations to all of you. Ms. Sohn, I'll lead with actually Mr. Davidson, because you mentioned a nice segue of his job, which will be overseeing the distribution of the state broadband grants, billions of dollars. And all of us, both sides of the aisle, have had frustrations in our states where money has gone out from the states, from the federal government, and it doesn't get done. It's one of the reasons, and I've talked to Secretary Raimondo about this, there's a clawback provision in there that would allow us to take back funds. Could you talk about the number one question I got when I was talking to people who are very excited about these grants, including yesterday with the president in Minnesota, is what is your plans to getting the distribution of the funding going?
Well, thank you, Senator Klobuchar. And I will just say that this is an incredibly important and historic opportunity for us to connect everybody. As you've mentioned, we have a twin imperative to get the money out that we've been given quickly and to get it out carefully. I think the plan there, first and foremost, is going to be working with the states. We need partners in the states, and I think there's a lot that NTIA can do to help build capacity in the states to be able to have a partner to work with. We can provide technical assistance. We've been given funding from Congress, and I think that would be a top priority in getting this moving.
Exactly. And I think everyone, you're going to start hearing about timetables and what's happening. We're very excited about this, and you're going to be in a key role, and I hope we get you confirmed immediately because of that, as well as the other nominees. Ms. Sohn, I'd start by just putting on the record, Madam Chair, if I could, submit a letter from the Consumer Technology Association in support of Ms. Sohn.
Yes, without objection.
Okay, very good. So, Ms. Sohn, you were just talking about your work with states, and you've also worked on a variety of issues. Of course, some of this have come up: broadband, competition, innovation. Can you talk about how you've worked with colleagues on the opposite side of the aisle on these types of issues?
Yes, Senator. So let me give an example from net neutrality, because that is an issue that obviously keeps coming up. And I think it's really important. Obviously, I'm a supporter. But in I believe it was in 2012, no, excuse me, it was 2010, we were waiting for the FCC to act on net neutrality. And It was taking a very, very long time. So I was asked, along with some other public interest groups, to consider a legislative compromise. This was led by Congressman Waxman, and there were some Republican offices involved as well. The ISPs were supportive, and the bill was not perfect, but Public Knowledge, the organization that I ran at the time, decided to support it. And the night before the news was going to get out that we were supporting this, I called my public interest colleagues and told them, we're going to do this. We know you're not going to be happy about it, but this is what we're going to do. And a lot of them were not happy about it. I think some of them are still unhappy about it to this day. But I think it was a demonstration of pragmatism, willingness to work with folks that you don't necessarily agree with, and the desire to get something done. Like nothing was happening. The FCC was frozen for whatever reason. And we got something done, and it actually caused the FCC to finally move. So I'm about making progress. I'm not interested in standing on ceremony, standing on my laurels. I want to get stuff done, and we have a great opportunity here.
Exactly. As you look at what we can get done, just two things I'll follow up on here. One is, and I know you've talked a lot about broadband, and we have a lot of members here with significant rural areas on both sides of the aisle. Could you talk about how you would work with rural providers in areas where they might not have any broadband right now, or more likely very, very low speed broadband?
So the IIJA specifically says that the FCC has to provide technical assistance. It requires NTIA to work with the FCC. And since NTIA is only 150 people, I think we could really help them provide technical assistance. And the NTIA, in turn, has to provide technical assistance to the states, okay, and the carriers that get money from the states. So I see it as sort of like a virtuous relationship. And I hope that we will get the opportunity, I know we'll get the opportunity to make sure that these unserved areas are served and that rural providers who need help, I mean, it's a complicated process, this like multi-grant process, that we can provide them the assistance they need.
Okay. One last question. You and I talked about how I chair of the 911 caucus, and we have still work to be done on upgrading our 911 systems. Could you very, very briefly talk about how you think we could modernize these systems? And I know I'll ask you in writing, Mr. Davidson.
I think what's most important, Senator Klobuchar, is that we don't have a digital divide in NG 911. And we have to have the resources to make sure that people in rural areas or people in low-income areas also have NG 911, not just people in rich areas. So I worry about that NG 911 divide as well.
Okay, very good. Thank you very much. I'll ask you, Mr. Ahmad, you, Mr. Kolko, questions on the record. I really appreciate your willingness to serve.
Thank you, Senator Klobuchar. Senator Moran.
Chairman, thank you very much. I never know whether those who don't get asked questions are pleased by that or feel left out. Consider it a compliment, I think. I appreciate all of your willingness to serve if confirmed. And I'm grateful. I serve on this committee. I'm also an appropriator for the Department of Commerce and an appropriator for the FCC. And I look forward to working with you in both those capacities. Mr. Davidson, I want to start with you. As I indicated, Senator Shaheen chairs, and I'm the ranking Republican on the committee that appropriates for NTIA. I need your commitment that you'll work with us on NTIA's budget and funding issues. I assume that's the case. I don't think you have a choice. And that when it comes to spending the dollars that Congress provided, I was in a part of the original group of 11 Republican senators who participated in the infrastructure bipartisan plan. I'm very interested in having the opportunity in conjunction with Senator Shaheen to have conversations with you on NTIA's implementation and execution.
Senator, you absolutely have that commitment, and I look forward to talking to you more about that.
I would welcome that. Ms. Sohn, you have impressed me this morning. I appreciate your intelligence and experience. I remember the days, I'm always griping that there are not Kansans in charge of the FCC, but I also remember the days of what I considered a lot of difficulties at the FCC in which members did not seem, in my view, to communicate with each other, and there was just a challenge there in getting along. I assume you would you would remember what I'm talking about and would indicate to me that you would work hard to avoid that circumstance.
Senator Moran, I absolutely would. And I must also say that when I was at the FCC, I always reached out to my Republican colleagues. I mean, I didn't just have, lunch with the commissioners, although I was in Ajit Pai's Fantasy Football League twice. So it's really important to me. To me, these things are not personal policy differences. So yes, I will do that.
I appreciate your answer to Senator Blunt's question. I too was concerned about, I'm a supporter, an advocate for local journalism, local broadcast journalism in particular, that the FCC would have jurisdiction over. And I wanted to make certain that what you said was the truth in regard to no hard feelings, no bias, no consequences to that lawsuit. And you confirmed that, and I appreciate that you did. Congress has allocated lots of money to new broadband deployment programs, many different agencies. And there is some thought that the Universal Service Fund, what's its role now? And we've had conversations. I visited with Chairwoman Rosenworcel yesterday. And the question that I raised with her is one I would raise with you. What role does USF play? I mean, we've talked about trying to expand where its revenues come from or to reform the USF fund. But with all the money that Congress is granting to deploy broadband, what now with the USF?
That's a great question. And what's great about that question is that the IAJA answers it, because it requires the FCC, I think within 30 days of the president signing the bill, to start a proceeding to look at how all the money, the $65 billion in the IAJA, how that will impact the Universal Service Fund. And I think that's really, really important. And then they have to submit a report within 9 months that lays out options for whatever might be left. I mean, it's entirely possible, again, I don't want to prejudge, but it's entirely possible that after all this money is spent, you don't need as big a high-cost fund, right? Or Lifeline is different. Again, I don't want to prejudge it, but I think that process, that provision is so important, because you don't just throw $65 billion at broadband and then just say, oh, well, here's universal service over here. So I look forward, if I'm confirmed, to participating in that proceeding, because I think that's going to be super important.
Your answer reminds me of the importance I would suggest to you and assume that you know, and same with Mr. Davidson, in the coordination. We've asked for a commitment from the FCC when your fellow commissioners were here that we're going to coordinate, and it would include rural development or USDA and others, to make certain that we do this in a smart way. Mr. Davidson, Congress set some important guidelines in the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act related to broadband deployment, defining unserved areas. The goal, of course, is to prevent overbuilding of existing networks. I'm an advocate for that view for a long time, and I've seen the consequences where we've spent money which, in my view, is not the place it should be spent. We've placed restrictions on particularly the USDA manners. Those restrictions were somewhat loosened, contrary to my desire in that bipartisan infrastructure bill. But I want to hear from you that you'll do everything you can to ensure that the intent of Congress in providing those resources to unserved areas is where the money will go.
Senator, I appreciate that question. I think the statute is actually quite clear. It lays out a framework. Unserved is first, and you have my commitment, if confirmed, to follow that framework faithfully.
Can you explain, Mr. Davidson, my clock is not here, so Chairman, use your gavel, but use it sparingly, please. Can you explain what NTIA's role in data privacy is? You indicated, I think in your testimony, that the FTC is just to set rules on unfair data collection and surveillance practices that may damage consumer privacy. In your written testimony, you mentioned the importance of NTIA helping to build a better internet, including efforts when it comes to protecting privacy. What are you telling us?
Well, Senator, certainly A, privacy is extremely important. B, I do believe that NTIA does have a statutory role, both as advisor to the president on telecommunications and and information policy, and also spelled out in places in the various statutes giving around NTIA. And then finally, I would just say NTIA has a history here already of providing in recent years analysis and support. Stakeholder listening sessions, as recently announced. And so I think there's work that we can do with the policy expertise that exists at NTIA to support the administration and Congress in its deliberations around privacy.
Senator Markey, thank you. Senator Moran.
Thank you, Chairman.
Oh, thank you, Madam Chair. Ms. Sohn, in 2015, the FCC approved the Open Internet Order, which put in place net neutrality protections and properly treated broadband as a telecommunications service under Title II of the Communications Act. The Trump-era FCC later eviscerated net neutrality and eliminated the Commission's rightful authority to protect broadband users, promote public safety, and close the digital divide. Yet the ongoing pandemic has left no doubt that today broadband is an essential utility. Now more than ever, Americans need net neutrality. Now more than ever, Americans need a commission with authority to oversee broadband. Ms. Sohn, do you believe that the FCC has the authority it needs to reinstate net neutrality and to restore classification of broadband as a Title II service, as Chairwoman Rosenworcel recently stated in front of this committee?
Yes, Senator Markey, I agree with Chairwoman Rosenworcel that the FCC has authority.
Thank you. It's going to be very difficult for us, obviously, to pass legislation, which I've been trying to move since my days in the House and over here in the Senate. So I do think it is very important for us to have three commissioners that do support the notion that the FCC has that authority to act. The coronavirus pandemic has also highlighted the homework gap that exists across our country. We know that 12 to 17 million children in America were without the internet throughout the course of this pandemic. I was successful in creating the Emergency Connectivity Fund, which is now providing $7 billion in E-rate home connectivity funding. To date, the FCC has allocated $6 billion has received more than $6 billion in funding and has awarded $3 billion in grants thus far. The program, to put it simply, has led to 10 million students receiving devices and having the internet at home, which they need. Unfortunately, the Emergency Connectivity Fund will soon run dry without additional funds. Ms. Sohn, do you agree that we should provide additional funding to the Emergency Connectivity Fund in the Build Back Better Act?
Yes, Senator Markey, absolutely. And congratulations, by the way, on the first Emergency Connectivity Fund.
Yeah, this is a crisis that we're in, and the new variant is only going to further exacerbate this problem, and we just have to be realistic about what's happening to second, third, fourth graders all across the country who do not have access. Do you think we need a permanent solution to this problem, given what we've learned during this pandemic?
Yes, Senator Markey. One thing that I would like to see the FCC do and would support if I'm confirmed would be a reinterpretation of the E-rate law to permit funding to go to homes, right? So my daughter's in back of me for a year and a half. Her classroom, which is what the law talks about being funded, right, connectivity to the classroom, was her bedroom. Sometimes it was a dining room table. It was usually the bedroom. So the FCC, in my opinion, has the authority to reinterpret the law, and I believe would be upheld by the courts, to say that the classroom is pretty much almost anywhere, but it certainly is in the home.
Yep, thank you. And I agree with you 100%. We just have to have a policy in our country that realizes that this is essential for children. My father drove a truck for the Hood Milk Company, but I could compete against the school superintendent's daughter or son in my hometown because I could take my books home. If you can't take your books home, you're not going to be competing. And that's what the internet represents here today. So we thank you, Ms. Sohn, for your historic contributions to telecommunications policy thus far. You are an expert, and we need experts in this field. So thank you for your service. And Mr. Davidson, Ms. Sohn was talking about the need to have essentially Darwinian paranoia-inducing competition in order to avoid regulation. But we know that competition falls short, and as a result, rural America, poor America, they haven't really received all the benefits of broadband, which is what your job is going to be. So on the question of municipal broadband projects, as you implement the $42 billion deployment program, what is your goal in terms of making sure that municipal broadband gets the municipal utilities get the resources they need in order to provide services?
Senator, thank you for the question. I'll just say, obviously, this is an incredibly important moment for us to be making sure that we're reaching everyone. And I think we really need an all-of-the-above approach to how we're going to connect, particularly in rural America. Municipal broadband has played a big role in some places. And I think that the statute, the IIJA, makes it quite clear that we believe that municipal broadband can be, for some states, will be an important part of the
And you
program.
commit to helping those municipal?
I commit to helping those municipalities do that and bringing the resources of NTIA to do that.
And finally, we have a report from scientists who project that sea level rise will submerge more than 4,000 miles of fiber optic cables during the next 15 years. Will you commit to working, to make sure that funding goes to make sure that the effects of climate change do not have devastating impacts in terms of access to broadband?
Resilience is an incredibly important value, I think, in implementing that. It's in the IIJA. Particularly, I'd call out the Middle Mile program that NTIA will be working on, and I think can help address the resilience issues that come up with broadband, particularly in the face of climate change.
Thank you. And again, we're trying to operate in an acronym-free zone. So IIJA is just another word of saying the infrastructure bill that just passed, for anyone who's wondering, what are we talking about?
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you,
We're in. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator Markey. I think we have Senator Blackburn, followed by Senator Peters, then Senator Sullivan.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Mr. Davidson, very quickly. One of the things, when I was in the House, I have said many times we need to have an inventory of spectrum that is held by federal agencies. And while Congress supported doing this, we have federal agencies that have opposed this. But we need to know what spectrum is in what hands, what they're using those bands for, and then we need to recoup spectrum that is lying fallow. This is NTIA's jurisdiction. Will you commit to working with us to get this done?
Senator, I would commit to working with you to get that done.
We appreciate that. I see Ms. Sohn over there kind of chuckling because she's heard me talk about this for years. And the need for getting this done. And Ms. Sohn, let me come to you. Let me ask you for a yes or no on some questions. Has the Pai administration's decision to repeal the Wheeler Title II rules in any way stopped the FCC from executing its broadband deployment efforts? Yes or no?
It has not, but it rests on a very thin reed.
Okay, a yes or
I
no?
know, I'm sorry. It
Yes
is
or
not.
no?
No, the answer is no.
Okay. All right, no, that's correct. It has not impeded. That is correct. You've said you support a Title II regime plus forbearance from various FCC regulations, what the FCC did in 2015. Senator Markey just referenced that. So is that forbearance worth anything? Can't future FCCs just unforbear and impose more rules on the internet?
Senator, indeed
Yes or
they.
no?
Oh, yeah, sorry about that. Yes, they could.
That's right. All right. Do you support broadband rate regulation?
No.
Okay.
That was an easy one.
Well, good, because in times past you have supported rate regulation, if my memory is correct. Would more regulation of the internet help encourage investment in broadband networks?
No, I don't believe, well, when you say internet regulation, are you talking about the broadband providers?
I am talking about the providers. regulation of the internet, government control of the internet. Are you going to get more private investment to continue expanding these networks? Or are you going to get less?
I believe it has no impact.
I would say you're wrong about that. Because look at what has happened by networks being able to get out there and expand broadband. There are a lot of counties in Tennessee, our 95 counties, where they have partnered up with state grants. They've partnered up with federal grants. They've partnered up with ILECs and CLECs and electric power co-ops. And we have very rural counties that are close to having fiber across the entire county. So it has an impact. A private sector approach works. Okay, the infrastructure bill that was recently signed into law funnels money to underserved areas, which means overbuilding existing networks and ignoring rural areas for cities. Do you believe this will close the digital divide?
I support the framework that unserved must be served first, okay? And then and only then, after the states prove to the NTIA that unserved is served first, then you could spend money on underserved.
Yes, because one of the downfalls of the Obama era was the overbuilding of networks, of existing networks in cities, and the rural areas were left behind. They did not get that money, and that's why we have as much disparity as we have existing right now. And we need to be encouraging that investment into these networks. Okay, when you worked for Tom Wheeler, you led the FCC's efforts to put broadband privacy rules into place, rules that Congress later struck down as an overreach of FCC authority. And you recently said that there is no real oversight of broadband carriers going on. So do you believe the FTC has in some way fallen down on its job as a consumer privacy agency?
I don't believe so, but I have to admit I haven't followed what the FTC has been doing very much lately.
Okay, well, they are the privacy regulator, and as we've debated for many years, very vigorously, this is their jurisdiction. This is not the FCC's jurisdiction, and we need one regulator, one set of rules for the entire internet ecosystem. Okay, if the FCC were to reclassify broadband as a Title II service again, would you support the FCC once again attempting to enact broadband privacy rules?
I would prefer if Congress passed a comprehensive consumer privacy bill. And I know, Senator Blackburn, you have been a leader in that regard. If the chairwoman undertook such a proceeding, I obviously would participate in it, and obviously she'd have to reclassify first. But I would prefer to see Congress settle the matter with a comprehensive consumer privacy bill. And I've been very, very clear on that.
Okay, thank you. You were on the board of directors for Locast, a streaming service that shut down right about the time you were nominated for pirating content. Locast was shut down for pirating content. Despite your talk about valuing content, it seems like you're not being consistent in your value of protecting intellectual property of creators. And as you know, retransmission is an issue that has been debated, and I know we're going to continue this conversation about protecting content that is there, but my time has expired. Madam Chairman, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Senator Peters. Oh, and by the way, happy birthday, Senator Peters.
Well, thank you, thank
You're
you.
not going to get a song from me.
Oh, I was
I'll have a
looking forward to
voice.
that so much.
But hope you have a wonderful day. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Madam Chairman, and thank you for recognizing me. And to each of our nominees, congratulations on your nomination, and thank you for your willingness to serve in these positions. Ms. Cohn, Michigan has an urban-rural broadband problem that certainly can't be addressed by one-size-fits-all, and that's not unique to Michigan by any means. That's basically the situation all across the country. That's why I co-sponsored the Broadband Infrastructure Financing Innovation Act, which supports public-private partnerships that work to connect families and communities. Probably one of the outstanding examples in my state is Northern Michigan University Educational Access Network,
that provides broadband connections to all the homes nearby. So I'd like you to talk a little bit about local partnerships, how important they are in your mind. Should we continue to focus on this? And if so, what do you recommend that we do to make sure these partnerships continue to provide these very vital services?
Thank you, Senator Peters. Look, I think localities are critical inputs to getting the digital divide closed. And again, the broadband infrastructure bill, I'll use Senator Markey's term, requires states to bring localities into the conversation. They can't just spend the money without talking to local officials, and I think that needs to continue. I think that's very, very important. I've dealt with an awful lot of mayors. They care deeply about this issue, and I think we need to continue to support their efforts to get broadband to their communities.
As chairman of Homeland Security and Government Affairs Committee, protecting critical infrastructure is one of my primary jobs. Critical infrastructure is currently certainly telecommunication networks, protecting them from cyber attacks. We have compromised components that are out there, and then natural disasters that hit and wipe out these services. This year, the Communications Security, Reliability, and Interoperability Council has made, I think, important steps to coordinate between the FCC and the Department of Homeland Security, but by allowing the Department of Homeland Security to co-chair for the first time. So certainly think that is long overdue and appreciate that. But Ms. Owen, how can DHS and FCC better coordinate to improve the security of these networks, create increased resiliency, and in particular, disaster recovery?
Senator, that's a great question. I can't say I've thought about it a whole lot, although I'm delighted to hear about the joint work of DHS and CSRIC. Actually, my wife works at DHS, so that's a good thing. I do think maybe perhaps what could happen is what we have with the FCC, and the FCC chair and the administrator of NTIA are required to meet twice a year. So maybe we could have something similar with the Secretary of DHS and Chairwoman Rosenworcel be required to meet at least twice a year to try to flesh out how we can work together. I'm really happy to hear this, because I know that former Chairman Wheeler really wanted to have the FCC more involved in cybersecurity, particularly now when you're seeing all these hacks. It's so critically important. But DHS obviously has the primary role. So I'd like to see some sort of movement to work together on a more regular basis.
Well, I appreciate that. And if confirmed, I would certainly like to work with you and have this conversation as to how we bring these agencies working together. We're passing some significant cyber protection legislation, which will hopefully be an NDAA that's before us. But the key thing that we're focused on is the fact that we have these silos in federal government. Folks are just not talking to each other. This is a system-wide problem, typical of a lot of big organizations. But when it comes to cyber, we've got to be coordinated. And when it comes to resiliency in natural disasters, we've got to be coordinated. So we'd love to work with you on that.
Absolutely.
There's also widespread recognition that in 1978 to 1995, the tax certificate policy was by far one of the most effective vehicles for advancing minority broadcast ownership. And in its 17 years of operation, the policy quintupled minority broadcast ownership. Another desirable tax initiative tailored for small businesses would provide a company donating a station to a training institution that they would receive a tax credit equal to that station's value. My question for you is, under your leadership, would the commission request Congress to restore and improve the tax certificate policy and create a tax credit for donating a station to a training institution? Is that something you'd be supportive of?
It's something I'm certainly supportive of. I was a huge supporter of the old minority tax certificate. I was very disappointed when it got repealed. I'd obviously have to talk to the chairwoman about, what the FCC could do to support that. But I personally am extremely supportive.
Great. Well, thank you very much. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thanks for watching. And if you haven't already, please consider subscribing to our channel. And while you're at it, please leave us a comment. Thank you for watching.